This conversation is generated under the StoreMore project. This project is supported by the Interreg Danube Region Programme, co-funded by the European Union. The content of this conversation does not necessarily represent the official position of the European Union.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are getting into something physically massive, geopolitically, very complex, and absolutely vital for the clean energy transition.
We're talking about Vanadium Redox Flow Batteries, or VRFBs.
Exactly. I mean, if you really want to make renewables work on a massive scale, all that solar, all that wind, you need storage that can go for hours and hours, not just minutes.
That's the whole point. You need something that can handle 4, 8, even 12 hours of continuous output to get you through the night or a calm day.
Right. So our mission today, using the technical papers and market forecasts you've pulled, is to really unpack this thing. We're going to look at the tech, the long-term economics, and the pretty significant global challenges it's facing.
And I think we have to start with the single most important feature. The thing that makes a flow battery totally different from, say, the lithium-ion battery in your phone.
Which is?
It decouples power and energy.
Okay, let's unpack that. What does decoupling actually mean for someone trying to build out the grid?
It means total flexibility. The power, how fast you could push or pull electricity, that's set by the size of the cell stack, the engine, basically.
Okay.
But the energy, the total amount you can store, is just set by how much vanadium electrolyte you have. And that's stored in these huge external tanks.
So wait, if a utility needs, say, 100 megawatts, but for a really long time, like 12 hours, they just build bigger tanks. They don't have to redesign the whole power system.
That's it. You just add more liquid. That kind of scalability is a massive deal for grid planners.
It sounds like it. And it also means they're built to last, right? These are true infrastructure assets.
Absolutely. The sources point to a ridiculously long lifespan.
Right.
We're talking 20 years of service, something like 15 to 20,000 deep discharge cycles with barely any degradation.
And this isn't some lab experiment. VRFBs are commercial. They're at what's called a TRL-7 technology readiness level 7. And they already make up about 4% of the world's installed storage, if you don't count pumped hydro.
This is a real player right now.
Okay, so let's dig into that. A quick look at the history is pretty interesting because the idea itself is actually quite old. Patented back in 1954 by a Dr. Walter Kengro.
It was. But the chemistry was always the tricky part. NASA tried to get it working in the 70s with iron and chromium.
And what happened?
It sort of worked, but you had this huge problem of cross-contamination. If the positive and negative liquids mix, even a tiny bit,
the battery just dies.
Pretty much. And that's why the all-vanadium version, the one developed by Skaus Kazakos in the 80s, was such a massive breakthrough. It solved that core problem.
Right, and the research really took off after 2011 when the world started getting serious about climate change and long-duration storage. But let's get back to that chemistry. Why vanadium?
This is the really elegant part. Instead of 2 different metals, you use the same element on both sides, just in 4 different oxidation states. All of it is dissolved in diluted sulfuric acid.
So even if some ions cross that membrane in the middle, it doesn't contaminate the other side because it's still just vanadium.
Exactly. The system can just electrically correct it. You've got V2 plus and V3 plus on the negative side and V4 plus and V5 plus on the positive. And when you charge it, the electrons move and it actually changes color.
It literally does. I love this part. Talk us through the color shift.
Sure. So during charging on the negative side, the V3 plus solution, which is green, turns purple as it becomes V2 plus plus.
Okay.
And on the other side, the positive side, the blue VO2 plus solution, oxidizes and turns this really distinct yellow.
That's a great visual. And all the while, you have protons - H plus ions crossing that membrane in the middle to keep everything balanced.
Yep, usually through a high-tech membrane. The trade name a lot of people know is Nafion. It's designed to let those tiny protons through but block the much larger vanadium ions. It's a key and very expensive piece of the puzzle.
So when we look at the whole system, you've got the tanks, the pumps, the power electronics, and then the heart of it all, the cell stack. But the sources say that stack is actually the biggest engineering headache.
It really is. Building a stack that performs well and, crucially, doesn't leak is a huge challenge for the companies making these things. The design is critical to make sure the electrolyte flows evenly across the entire electrode surface.
And here's something that surprised me. Researchers are always testing these really complex, intricate flow field designs in the lab, but commercially,
most of them just use the simplest no-flow field design.
why is that?
It's a cost-benefit trade-off. A complex design might give you a tiny efficiency boost, but the simple one is just way cheaper and easier to manufacture reliably at scale.
That makes sense.
But we have to talk about the big limitation here. The elephant in the room. Energy density. It's incredibly low. We're talking 10 to 30 watt-hours per kilogram.
And for context, a lithium-ion battery is, what, 10 times denser than that? Easily.
At least. Which is why you will never, ever see a vanadium flow battery in a car or a phone.
So why are we even talking about them?
Because density just doesn't matter when your battery is the size of a building. These are purely for large-scale stationary applications, where space isn't the primary constraint. They're perfect for stabilizing the grid.
Okay, so let's get into those applications. What are the main jobs they're built for?
3 big ones. First is just grid energy storage, peak shaving and load leveling. Storing cheap power at night and selling it back during expensive peak hours.
Right.
Second, the obvious one, renewable integration. Soaking up all that excess solar and wind power so you can use it when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
And the third?
The third is providing what are called grid services, things like frequency regulation and voltage support. And they have this amazing black start capability.
Meaning they can help restart the entire grid after a total blackout.
Exactly. And they can do it because their response time is incredibly fast. We're talking fractions of a second.
That's amazing. But for any big infrastructure project, the numbers have to work. Looking at 2021 data for a big 100 megawatt 10-hour system, the upfront cost, the capex, was about 350 euros per kilowatt hour.
Right. And to give that some context, a similar lithium-ion system at the time was actually a little bit more expensive, around 370 euros. So that idea that VRFBs are just wildly more expensive up front isn't always true anymore.
And this is where it really gets interesting, the long-term costs. The operating expenses are super low, just 12 euros per kilowatt per year. That durability is the real selling point.
It is. When you look at the total cost over the project's life, what's called the levelized cost of storage, or LCOS, that's where the VRFB pulls ahead.
And the numbers on that?
The comparison in our sources shows the LCOS for a VRFB at around $111 per kilowatt hour versus $133 for Li-ion. But that's measured over a 40-year time frame.
40 years. So you're not buying a battery, you're installing a piece of permanent infrastructure.
And a safer one, too. Because the electrolyte is water-based, they're not flammable, you don't have the same risk of thermal runaway that you see with some large lithium-ion projects.
That's a huge plus. We should be clear, though, it's not without its own safety issues. You're dealing with corrosive sulfuric acid.
Absolutely. This is an industrial chemical plant, effectively. You need very strict engineering and handling protocols to prevent any leaks or spills.
Okay, so they're robust, they're safer, they last forever. Why haven't they just taken over the whole market? Let's talk about the hurdles, starting with those initial costs. That vanadium electrolyte isn't cheap.
No, and neither are those specialized membranes. But beyond cost, there are some real technical performance limits. One big one is something called vanadium crossover.
That's the leaking we talked about earlier.
Exactly. A tiny amount of those vanadium ions bleed through the membrane over time, which causes a gradual loss in capacity.
Is that a major issue day to day?
It's manageable. You can rebalance the electrolyte periodically. A more immediate problem can be electrolyte stability. If the system gets too hot, above 40 Celsius, the vanadium can literally precipitate out of the solution. It turns into a solid.
And that basically ruins the battery.
It does. It requires a pretty intensive process to fix.
Right.
So temperature management is critical. Then you have the inherent efficiency losses.
Right, the 3 types. Can you break those down for us?
Sure. You have activation losses, which is just the energy it takes to get the chemical reaction started. Then you have ohmic losses.
Which is just electrical resistance, right? Like losing energy as heat.
Precisely. Resistance in the membrane, the electrodes, everywhere. And finally, you have concentration polarization. That's basically a mass transfer problem. You can't get the ions to the electrode surface fast enough.
So improving the materials, especially that membrane, would directly attack those ohmic losses and boost efficiency.
That's a huge area of research. But the really big barrier, the one that hangs over the entire industry, is the vanadium supply risk.
The geopolitics of it.
It's a critical metal for a reason. The resources are incredibly concentrated. China has almost half the world's reserves. Then Russia, South Africa, and Australia. 4 countries hold almost everything.
And production is even more concentrated than that.
In 2020, China, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil produced pretty much 100% of the world's vanadium. It's an oligopoly.
Which means what, in practice? Price volatility.
Massive price volatility. And a serious strategic reliance on China, especially if you're planning to build these things at scale in Europe or the US. Your project's budget is tied to the decisions made in a handful of countries.
That's a huge risk. And even if you can secure the vanadium, you run into regulatory hurdles here in Europe.
Yeah, that's another headache. Because of the acid in the large tanks, regulators sometimes treat a VRFB like a chemical plant, not a battery. That means the permitting process can be incredibly slow and complex.
So given all those barriers, how is the industry moving forward? Innovation seems to be key.
For sure. On the cost side, there's a huge push for recycling, getting vanadium out of spent batteries, but also from industrial waste streams where it's a byproduct.
Decoupling the price from pure mining.
Exactly. And on the performance side, it's all about material science. Graphene electrodes, new types of membranes, and much smarter battery management systems to control temperature and efficiency.
And here's a fascinating market trend: vertical integration.
This is one of the coolest developments. The vanadium producers, the actual mining companies, are getting into the battery business themselves.
People like Bushveld Minerals or Largo Resources.
Right. Bushveld owns a stake in a VRFB company called CellCube. Largo started its own, Largo Clean Resources. They see the writing on the wall. If demand from the steel industry fluctuates, they need a new, stable market for their metal.
And by controlling the whole supply chain, they can offer a much more stable price to the end customer, the utility.
It de-risks the whole proposition. It's a really smart move. And we are seeing these things get built at a massive scale now.
The Dalian project in China is the monster example, right?
200 megawatts, 800 megawatt hours. It is just a gargantuan storage facility. It proves the technology works at that scale.
And we're also seeing smarter hybrid deployments, like the Energy Super Hub in Oxford in the UK.
I love that project. It's a hybrid system. They have a relatively small 2 megawatt VRFB paired with a big 50 megawatt lithium-ion battery.
And the design philosophy there is really clever.
It's genius. They use the VRFB for all the daily hard cycling work. They charge and discharge it constantly. This saves the lithium-ion battery from all that wear and tear, basically preserving it for moments when they need a really big burst of power. It extends the life of the entire system.
So if we pull this all together, the final report card from our sources gives VRFBs a will it change everything score of 60.25? Pretty respectable.
And the breakdown is perfect. It got a full 100 points for energy retention and lifetime, but it got hammered on energy density and upfront capex. That score tells the whole story.
It really does. It's a specialized tool. It might be bigger, heavier, and more expensive to install, but for those really long duration jobs, anything over 4 hours, its safety and incredible lifespan make it an indispensable part of the future grid.
And I think the key thing to leave people with is that concept of durability. That 15,000 to 20,000 cycle life means you're not just installing a battery, you're building a fixed 30 or 40-year infrastructure asset. It provides a kind of foundational stability that just challenges the whole replacement cycle model of other battery technologies.
That is a powerful final thought. When you see pictures of those huge tanks at a project like Dalian, what you're really looking at is the physical embodiment of the deep electrical stability that's going to be needed to make the renewable transition a success. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.